Hey everyone, welcome back to Autism Uprooted with BioNexus Health. Today is going to be an amazing podcast. I would like to dedicate today's podcast to autism moms. We will have the unique opportunity to talk about inner strength, recovery from chronic illness, being a mom of a special needs child, the healing journey, the trials and tribulations, and what helped bring on the triumphs. When does one surrender, have faith, and keep taking baby steps, trusting in the journey, trusting in your own self? Knowing who you are is very important. Just like the wonderful Maya Angelou says, all great achievements take time. So be still, take the next step. You don't have to know the next 100 steps, just one more step in the right direction. And as most of you know, I speak from experience as an autism mom myself. Surround yourself with people who uplift you and support you. Cancel out the chatter, the noise from the doubters, the haters, the ones who bring you down. Get rid of toxic people, toxic emotions from your life. Stick with your dreams. Believe in your vision of your future and the future of your child. And be steadfast on that path. You will meet with extraordinary success. Again, I speak from experience. So my today's guest has achieved all that and so much more. It is a wonderful treat to have this opportunity to speak to my friend, Anne Pemberton, human being extraordinaire.
Welcome to the BioNexus Health podcast with Dr. Jodie A. Dashore, who holds a PhD in integrative medicine, is board certified in integrative pediatrics, an internationally recognized pioneering clinician, and author. And now here's your host of BioNexus Health podcast, Dr. Jodie A. Dashore.
Anne's career spans 25 years of cardiothoracic intensive care nursing. She was blessed with a son, later diagnosed with autism. Her son's diagnosis totally changed her career trajectory as she looked to natural therapies to support him and found herself in the process. That's so wonderful. And retrained in psychology, then later in functional medicine as well. So she combines functional medicine with the 5 levels of healing model in a busy, very popular international clinic across the pond in the UK. Now, Anne is also a published author and established international speaker. Since 2008, Anne has been teaching academic and clinical modules on nutritional therapy courses. She ran the Masters in Nutrition Science and Practice course at the Northern College of Acupuncture in York, United Kingdom, from 2010 to 2017. She is a regular in-demand contributor for the ICAM magazine. So let's welcome my amazingly accomplished friend, Anne Pemberton. Welcome, Anne. How are you today?
Oh, thank you, Jodie. That was a lovely introduction. I feel so blessed to be here.
It's an absolute honor having you, Anne. You've been an inspiration to me for so many years.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you. So we are both autism moms, and we have both had quite a remarkable journey with so many ups and downs. So if I may request you to share some of that, what inspired you to find your path to healing? And when you started, where did that lead you?
Oh, how long have you got? I'll try and précis that. I don't come from a very privileged background. You know, my parents grew up in the war. My dad lost his mum at the age of 2 and was brought up by his 16-year-old sister, who he perceived to be his mum until he was told different when he got older. And she brought up 9 siblings, 2 of which they lost the same year as their mum. So they had nothing, absolutely nothing. And my mum came from a whole background of Catholicism, where there was a lot of alcohol, a lot of violence. So the pair of them were traumatized, for want of a better description. And so, you know, my dad worked, well, both of them worked very hard, but my dad was on the railway, my mum worked in the corner shop. So the background was not there to even get into academic life, really, because it was in the UK, it was the top 1% of the population. If your daddy was a doctor, you could be a nurse. So even getting into nursing school was hard. So that was kind of the start on where we actually came from. But then, nursing, I think, grew me, because it kind of brought me out of that. It wasn't all trauma, because my parents were beautiful people, but it brought me out of that transgenerational stuff, I think, and it helped me to grow. And then I started having children. I have 2 boys, and I have to say, the eldest one gets all the kudos because he is the special needs child, but they are both extremely special. You know, the eldest one, as you've just quite rightly said, brought me back to me. The youngest one brought love into a totally loveless situation. And, you know, when I think about both of them, it actually makes me cry. But yeah, so that was kind of the start.
I love, sorry, Anne. I have to interject. That was so well said, so beautifully put. So you're such a beautiful person. You just are.
I guess, you know, I guess when you don't come from a privileged background, you appreciate everything that the divine brings to you, don't you? You know, I don't think my children really do, because they've not grown up from that background. Because, you know, my parents got themselves out of that, and we managed, or my dad managed to buy his own house when I was 14. So, and we've always had our own home, and thanks to the good things Margaret Thatcher did in Britain, we were able to buy our own home and make that even better, you know. So, you know, my kids are privileged compared to how we were, and they don't see that really. But, and neither does anyone in that generation. But that's kind of going off topic, isn't it?
Right.
But yeah, so my eldest boy had birth trauma, exactly the same birth trauma I had. It was almost like a complete repeat. The only difference being he wasn't a C-section. But it was never well. It was always a really sickly baby. The usual ear infections, chest infections, screamy baby, never slept at night. We used to take him in the car at 3 o'clock in the morning in a baby bouncer to try and get him to sleep. And then the minute we brought him back and put him in the car, again, you know. So never got any sleep. And the pair of us were low wage earners as well. One of us was a chef, the other was a nurse. So I still had to work, which meant neither of us got sleep for years. But at the age of 6, we finally got a diagnosis for him. Everybody said, oh, he's a gifted child, is this, is that, you know. But the beautiful thing was his headmistress in the primary school he was at was a psychologist and very switched on. And it was her that said, the ed psych is saying he has autism, but they won't tell you because it will cost them a lot of money to educate him, you know. And I went, really? I mean, I had no exposure to this stuff, you know. Anyway, I said, what do I do? And she said, well, you need to get a diagnosis first. So I beat the professionals down, basically. The psychologist we were seeing, he just said to me, I feel so stupid. I said, please don't. I have no judgment here. We're all trying to do the best for my son. Just please send me to the person who will give us a diagnosis so that I can get this child some help. And we saw the psychiatrist, and I could hit myself for doing this, but I fed him a box of Smarties before we went, knowing full well that Smarties would have him off the ceiling. But I was just so desperate for someone to say, look, you're not a crazy mum. You don't have Munchausen's, because all of that came through before all this.
So Anne, wait, I'm sorry. What?
Yeah.
You fed him a box of Smarties. So that's, I see. Okay, so you were hoping for a diagnosis, or you were, okay.
I wanted someone to see him
Right.
as he was, because what was happening was we kept a very quiet household at home. So he never really had cause to be overwhelmed. But the minute he went to school, school was a nightmare for him. He went to 6 different schools. By the time he was 12, he was in mainstream, then special, mainstream, then special. And then he even went in and out of authority placement, because in the end, he was abused in that system, and a restraint policy that went badly wrong. And I took them to tribunal, and we actually got the school which was supposedly for these type of children, but because he was already so damaged, that failed within a year, and they were going to section him. And I got a call from the school at work to say, we're pushing for a section. And I said, you're not, over my dead body. So my brother came with me. I got in the car and we drove 5 hours down to Southampton to pull my child out of the school to avoid section. But he'd gone from, he was years ahead of his peers when he started school, and by this time he was pure canners. He was just sitting in the floor, head rocking, banging his head on the wall. There was nothing. But the thing that hung it all together for me was when he was diagnosed, age 6, the psychiatrist gave him a diagnosis in seconds. And she said 2 things to me. She said, you will never get his education right within this authority. They just will not pay the money. And he'll be put down as an emotionally and behaviourally disturbed child. But then the second thing she said to me was, if you can keep him calm and get him to university's a sheltered housing for these children. Well, I didn't know that. I hadn't even been to university, But I held on to those 2 things that she said. She said it would be about age 12 when he was in charge of his own learning and things would change. But at the age 12, that's when he had the nervous breakdown from being in the school away from home. And so he didn't go back to high school. I never let him. That's when I was doing all the training. I'd done the psychology degree by then. And I was looking at postgraduate teaching, kids with autism. I got it into my head, there's only me that can teach this child. So, try and take more pressure on him.
So Anne, wait, sorry,
yeah.
I'm so fascinated by your story. I keep interrupting you. I think I will switch the view to where both of us are on at the same time. This is, I can't tell you how many moms are going to relate to what you're saying. And, you're speaking about being abused by the education system. We can all relate to that. Now, those watching, keep in mind, Anne is in the United Kingdom. So, that can be surprising to hear the lack of awareness that we have in our respective societies for children with special needs. Everyone wants to put them in a very definitive box and leave them there. And it really breaks my heart when you mentioned restraint.
Yeah, we were forced to sign a restraint policy to keep him in mainstream school. Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And he was sent away from home to be in a specific special needs school,
yeah.
right? And you as a parent tend to follow the established guidelines,
Well,
trusting that it might work.
well, the thing was, after the abuse in the school, I didn't know it was happening, but he had a carer, a full-time carer, which we did get eventually, from various assessments.
Mhm.
And the carer she was wonderful, absolute spot on. I loved her to bits. And what happened was, we were at home one day. My friend came, who was a social worker, with her younger child, and my boy went into his program. The child came in and he said, "Right, Matthew, we're going into your program now." And my friend and myself just went when we watched what was happening. So he was playing out what was going on at school, and I just didn't know what to do. I froze. And my friend says, "You do realise I have to report this? I know you're my friend." And I said, "I get it. It's fine. You'll still be my friend. Just do whatever you have to do." Anyway, she reported it. There was lots of investigation, but basically the education authority and the health authority, because my kids then had to go to the health authority to be checked out. And I nearly lost them both at this
Oh my
point.
goodness. Oh.
Because they both ganged up on me. My own profession ganged up on me, and the education authority, because they wanted to protect this person, this head teacher.
Right.
And so that's why my son went away to school, because if I hadn't have agreed to him go, I took them to tribunal, so that was ongoing. But because of this situation escalating, they suddenly said, right, he can go to that school and he has to go, otherwise they're both under the care of the authority.
See, that's, yeah, so that is, so important to understand when to kind of, follow the rules just to keep the peace. I remember many bullying incidents with Brian as well. And, he would come home with bruises. And I remember sitting on the stairs trying to elicit something, nonverbal clues as to what happened, and I remember once, just I brought him home from daycare, from his nursery school, and he had these bruises, and within 5 minutes I put him back in the car and I was back at the school, and I'm asking the headmistress, "What is this?" And she just it did not even take her a second to deny, "Oh, it didn't happen here." I'm like, "I just brought him home. What are you trying to say?" I mean, it is, many parents dream of mainstreaming their child, right? From special needs, let's go to regular classes. But then in regular classes, there are no integration programs, transitional programs, and then you have children who don't understand what this special needs children go through, and then there is that abuse. I mean, we had bullying, we had, after treatment, after a few years, when Brian learned to have functional conversation, he actually stood in front of his class and he spoke with the help of his assistant teacher with him. And he said, "I have pandas. It's an autoimmune condition. My head shakes. I make weird, vocal sounds. I can't help it. It's like a hiccup. But you have to understand that it's okay to be friends with me because you're not going to catch what I have." And, that I think, I had requested the class teacher, the class mom to attend. And she had other moms attend as well. And, she told me later, I actually remember Dylan's mom, that she felt ashamed of how she had raised her child with complete lack of compassion for someone like Brian, and since then, Dylan and Brian had become good friends. Anyways, well, please continue. It's just, it just brought back memories.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, well, I can't remember where I got to then. So yeah, so obviously he went away to school. I then brought him out. He didn't go back to secondary school, but all the way through we have a set of schools run by the National Autistic Society. And there's one particular school that's about 40 miles away from us. And the headmistress of that particular school was very helpful all the way through. And at the age of 7, when my son Philip was 7, I went to look at that school, and I would have loved him to go there. And that's actually what I would have fought for. But the difficulty was, because my son was so upset and distressed in school, what was happening was he was kicking off in school. And in that particular National Autistic Society school, the staff were the absolute best that I could have hoped for. But the environment was a small detached house where they had about 36 children in there. It was cramped. So if
all
my
special
son,
needs, all
yeah,
36
all
special
autis-
needs,
all
all autistic.
autism spectrum, but some were
Okay.
in wheelchairs, some had, dyspraxia, that all that kind of
Right.
stuff. Some had other the other conditions that often come with it. So they had quite a mix of quite severe children, the ones that would never ever be able to go to mainstream school. And because he was able, and because he had the propensity to fly off the handle, even though I knew those people were the best he could possibly hope for, the environment was wrong, because if he'd have kicked off, children would have been unsafe. And I couldn't live with that guilt on top of everything else. So what I did was I kept in touch with them all the way. And then when my son was about 14, an entrepreneur bought them a secondary school and did it out for them. And so then they transferred all the children into there. So then they had a school that would take 1,000+ children, and they have 100 children in it. So there was the space, and they took him at age 14 and a half.
Okay.
And at the time, I remember talking to the psychologist of the school, and he said, Anne, he's such a bright lad. He doesn't need to be here. And I said, look, he sleeps with me. He's 14 and a half. We have to get out of this thing. I'm not bothered about his academics. If you please just help him to see that there's someone else good in this world apart from his mum, then we're on a winner. That's all we need. Just give him his confidence back. Tell him he's got something useful to give to society, because I know he has. Yes. And so they did. They gave him his own program. They gave him his own room with his own computer. All they asked of him was to come into the classroom for the last 15 minutes of every day. He had his own fob to go through the doors, because a lot of these kids escape all the time, don't they? Bless the little souls. And he worked with the IT lady, because that's his special skill. He writes programs. He does electronic engineering. He's
wonderful.
typical
Wow.
one of those. He taught himself all that before he was 3 years old. We had no input other than to buy the computers and work hard to pay for those. But they did so well with him. And at the end of his first year, I had already been doing a C++ programming course with him, just to see if he could manage, to be in a learning environment again. And he absolutely flowered. And I think it was because the teacher respected his position, and it was just a night school, without knocking it away. But he got a city in guilds. So that meant he could learn. Yeah, fantastic, he could learn. So at the end of that first year, I said to we have the usual yearly meeting, what's going to happen next year, what services do we require? And I just said to the staff and the psychologist, look, they were of the mind that we could get him a Hallamshire University open ticket, so that he could do a degree from their school, and he could just carry on being his autism self, and that was fine, if that's all we were hoping for. But my mind was, actually he needs to go out into society because he's been given these tools now and he has to practice those tools. And if we got him on a course that he could realistically manage, he then would have the time and the space to see what's going on in his environment as well, rather than being this just narrow focused academic whatever. And I explained that to them, and I said, the way I see this happening is he needs a couple of GCSEs. He particularly needs English and he particularly needs maths to get him into university. And his City and Guilds will at least get him into college if he's got those 4. And then we can take that route. And they went, I said, honestly, please trust me. I know what he needs, you know. And I said, and I know it's going to be difficult for him, but let's face it, he's a tough kid. He's come through all of this that he's had happen to him. He's a tough kid. He's like his mum. Let's just go for it.
Right.
And if it fails, we can come back,
right.
you know. And they said, absolutely, you can. I said, lovely. I said, I love you all for what you've just done. But he went to the local college because he couldn't go to a school in their environment because it was out of authority. And we have lots of red tape about, you know, what the authority will pay for. And,
yes.
Oh, it's so Dickensian here in that respect. So he went to the local college. I supported his English, knowing he would find English difficult because, you know, they're very hyperlexic, aren't they? But give them some, fancy stories, and they just don't get the drift of the story.
I know. Don't I know this? My goodness, you know, that's how it was with Brian. You know, like give him mathematical problems, give him computation, don't give him word problems, you know, where there's reading comprehension involved. I mean, even now he's in med school and it's like, Mom, you know, I have this ethics paper to write. What do I do? So I'm like, you know, let's brainstorm together. And yeah, isn't that, yes, well, what you mentioned, hyperlexic. I do have several patients, as well, as I'm sure you've seen many, you know, that are bright, hyperlexic, you know. And I absolutely love what you said, because oftentimes in many cultures, individuality is put aside for following the routine academic path. Oh, you know, I have a son who's 12. Okay, he should be in this grade. He should be doing long division. He should be doing this. He should be, you know, this is what we need to focus on. You know, I want to make him, you know, appear normal, because there is, you know, often shaming from family members, from society. Oh, you're the one who has that kid. Like, really, you know, like you. So it takes a very special person. It's, you know, moms, dads, very special person to support the child and say, you know what, this is what he is good at, just like you did. And let's help his self-confidence, you know, by standing behind and encouraging what he feels comfortable with. We already know he's bright. So
they all are, Jodie. I've never seen, even the ones with the lowest IQs are good at something.
Yes.
And we don't all have to be doctors. We don't all have to be professors, because this world needs every one of us.
Exactly.
And this is my belief. I believe these are chosen children. They are light bodies, which is why they are super sensitive to everything. They beat their own drum to their own tune because they have a purpose to help this world's ascension, as it were.
Yes.
And yeah, they're all bringing gifts to this world, but they are the creatives that are going to change this world in the future. That's what I believe. You know?
I absolutely agree. You know, you actually reminded me of little Jake. He was the first hyperlexic child I had come across in my practice, other than Brian. And beautiful, you know, he was so, I remember we were doing colors in the beginning. He was 2.5, right, when I started with him. And and he would be so particular. I'm like, oh, this is orange. He goes like, peach. I'm like, oh, okay, this is peach. It's not orange. And I'm like, all right, so that's maroon, magenta. I'm like, okay, Jake.
Love it.
So, so beautiful, and then he grew up, and his mom, absolutely amazing, Lisa, she, kind of felt her mind open, and just like you and I felt her, because Jake had his own path, very bright, right? Numbers, letters, very bright, but he did not have an inclination towards academics. I mean, even though, he would do really well in school, but long story short, he took up bowling, and, him and his 9 pins, right? He loves it. And he became, he became the state champion in bowling in his age group. And now he is 17, and he teaches other children with special needs or not how to excel at bowling. And that's his calling. He is still representing the state in his age group. So, his mom thought he would be this, doctor, engineer, whatever, IT person. No, that's he can do all that if he put his mind to, but that's not what he wants to do. And so there you go.
We all have to beat to our own tune, don't we?
Exactly.
But the whole narrative gives us a whole lot of conditioning as to why we're not supposed to do that. Because really, as I said, I found me through this process.
Yes.
When my son was diagnosed, I pinned my mum down and said, please don't protect me anymore, but just answer me one question really honestly and truthfully. And she said, what? And I could see her face change, because she knew what I was going to ask, because my mum was very knowledgeable. And I just said, was I like him as a child? And she said, absolutely. And I said, I really respect you for that. That's great, so there is an element. I mean, when we look at autism, we're seeing the children at the one end of the scale, but then look at us, when even neurotypical people, when they get stressed, what do? They lock down, they hide themselves away, they talk gibberish, they go out straight into frontal brain, which means get from A to B in the safest way possible. And if we only just look at ourselves and say, what would make me behave in that way, then we have an understanding, because we're all equal.
Absolutely. Yes. Now you've been through a lot of health issues. So when you say that you discovered yourself, you discovered yourself at all 5 levels, that all 5 levels needed healing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had my 3rd near-death experience 5 years ago. I had a near-death experience at birth, because I was a very severe birth trauma, where both Mum and I nearly lost our lives.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and then when I had my first son, the one with the diagnosis, I also had a postpartum hemorrhage with him. And I nearly lost my life then, needed 9 units of blood transfusion and attended theatre I don't know how many times to stop the bleeding. And then my 3rd near-death experience, I got mold-induced pneumonia with mast cell activation. But it was a big emotional thing that set that off as well. It was something happened in the role I was doing. I thought it was my role. I thought, I just felt so privileged to be in that role. And I felt it was my soul's calling, but it wasn't. And something happened, and it was very emotional. And I gave my notice the same day. It was like, I'm not tolerating this anymore. I went off to Seattle, and I was under par. My immune system was on the floor, because emotionally that had just taken me. It was almost like the straw that broke the camel's back, really. I went off to Seattle. I contracted pneumonia out there, and then I managed to fly back, because I didn't even know I had pneumonia. I was still working. But on the plane home, they didn't have a gluten-free meal for me, and the meal that they brought me was already plated up. And I thought, that's strange. Why is that plated up and not in the plastic, sealable thing? they'd obviously put a meal together because they didn't have one for me.
Right.
And even though my intuition said, don't eat this, I just took one mouthful and it had high fructose corn syrup on it. It was a salad. So I thought it'd be, you know, and so because I have all the genes that can't break down histamine, the whole thing just went whoosh, and I was 30,000 feet up. There was a doctor on board who attended me, and I said to them, please do not bring the plane down. I have to go home. And because I'm a heart math coach, I concentrated on my own breathing all the way home, connected to source, though I didn't realize I was doing that at the time, and just prayed all the way home.
Oh, wow.
And then got home. But it was a week later when I collapsed. And then 3 months, to be honest, Dr. Jess helped me a lot with that, sending me bits and pieces over. Dr. Patricia Kane and Dr. Damien Downing saved my life with their phosphatidylcholine intravenous.
Dr. Kane, yes, yeah.
But I still didn't want to be here. There was a whole thing around, do you know what? I've done this enough. I've had enough. I've done it enough. I don't want to be here. And I got quite resentful that my life had been saved in some ways. And so I wasn't getting well. And then a lovely friend of mine called Nikki Gratrix was, she was doing an emotional detox program. And she said, Anne, do you want to be part of this emotional detox program? I'm learning so much. She said, I've been on Eileen McCusick's whole course gifted to me. And I've been on it, and it's just amazing, this energetic work that she's doing with the tuning forks. And I went, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, let me have a go, you know. And it kind of sparked I've got something to aim for. Maybe I will stay, you know. I did all that emotional detox program with her. She gifted me all the forks, and then I bought all the solfeggio forks. I got really in tune with it. And then she opened up the Ascension portal because she always wanted to be an Ascension queen. So she's moved from functional medicine into Ascension. And of course
she has. Oh, I would. Okay, now isn't Nikki the one who also works with the vagus nerve?
Yeah,
she's the one, right? She's
we trained together at the Institute of Optimum Nutrition years ago, and I never really knew her because there were 150 people in my course, and you kind of stay with your friendship group, don't you? But in the third year we had a clinic together, and we both had a recognition of the strength in the other person. For me, I'd come from Western medicine where every organ is separate and the brain's separate from the body. And whoa, how do you put that into a functional medicine model when you've especially when you've just worked on the heart and the kidneys, because the kidneys are connected to the heart somehow when nothing else is. But it was like, I can put it all into the functional medicine model. Like, I was finding it really difficult from that entrenched way, which is my autism, to be honest. You know, once you get in that thing. Anyway, but I have the facts, so she can do all this fancy stuff with the functional medicine model, and then I'll say to her, what about that, and what about that, and what about that, you know. So we were kind of working together for her patient, and then afterwards she gave me some really wonderful opportunities, because when she opened the Optimum Health Clinic, and so she built with her then partner. She built the Optimum Health Clinic. They got studies in the BMJ, and she made herself world famous as a result of that. And she's another just amazing person. And so she got me the speaker engagements for ICAM, because she would message me and say, oh, do you know, they only pay this and I can't afford to come over, and just, you know, and will you do this for me? Or she'd say, I just can't do it. I can't get a visa. And so she got me on stage, but I had to take half a bottle of GABA to get on stage, you know, in the early days. But, you know, you kind of get there. Once you know that people are interested in your voice, you know, and once you know that, for me, it's all about case studies. And I'm quite happy to say when a case study doesn't work out, because then you learn from it, don't you?
Right.
And so you know, people like that. They like the stories. I'm a good storyteller. So
yes, you are. You're a wonderfully engaging storyteller. See, that's actually what's generating all my questions. I'm like, okay, you know, I had a few questions in mind, but they're all out the window because there's so much additional, you know, exciting, stimulating stuff that I'm listening to you, and it's all coming to me. So, you know, you must have had did you have any toxic friends or family members, like while you were personally detoxing your emotions? Did you have to get rid of them? How did you manage to, you know, establish those boundaries that, you know, I mean, you know what I'm trying to say. So
yeah, absolutely, yeah. Nearly everybody in my life was toxic apart from my children. Because I attracted them, because I was the obsequious one, gave in to everything. So
people
I just
pleaser,
people, yeah,
not being
absolutely.
able to say no. I hear you.
Yeah,
I hear.
yeah, absolutely. And that's what caused my ill health. It was, you know, it because those kind of people berate you, knock you down, all that kind of stuff. Well, you start to believe it in yourself and leave a marriage. I had a marriage of 30 years like that, which is why I say my youngest son was a gift from heaven, because he brought love into a totally loveless situation. But I didn't even realize it was loveless because, you know, my mum, to be fair, was an alcoholic. So, you know, how do you get love? How do you realize what love was? I was very lucky because my dad was very spiritual like me. Even though he never realized his own spirituality, he was afraid of it, but he was always the one I allied with, and it was his lessons I learned. You know, my mum's, I just used to go, oh, forget it, you know. And I fought my mum, but my dad just held us both, bless him. He was the saint, really. But yeah, so it's all, yeah. I think what's happened as I have done more and more work on myself, my children have grown, and my eldest one now owns his own home and is educated to master's level, and he is an electronic and a computer engineer.
Amazing.
You know, so, and he bought my parents' family home,
Oh, he
which is so
did.
beautiful. Yeah, which is
Oh,
so
beautiful.
beautiful, Jodie. You know, I couldn't hope for anything better because he's in my mum and dad's bungalow, and it just feels so safe because he's still vulnerable. You know, he's out in community. He travels all over the world. He's one of the furry convention, you know, that wear furry suits and go out and do
Yes.
special things for the cancer research, and they hug kids, you know. So all that closeness that he never could have as a child, he's developing now with other children and well, grown-ups as well, because they all like to hug a tiger, don't they? Or, you know, we're all a bit that. And so, you know, I can't even remember where I went down there, but you know, he's got all of that now, which is so lovely. Yeah. So yeah.
Marvelous. You know, that you, sorry, forgive me. It's cold and chilly here.
Bless you.
As we were discussing earlier, right? You know, we have the tail end of Hurricane Ian. So it did the crazy stuff in Florida, all the devastation. One of my colleagues actually was impacted in Fort Myers, and then now it's been traveling up. Yeah, so yeah. It's been traveling up the Carolinas. Now we've had Ian here since yesterday. Non-stop rain, windy, cloudy, my goodness. But that's Mother Nature, right? Mother Nature's been on the warpath the last few years.
She certainly has, yeah. We've got autumn here, and it's actually some days it feels like it's coming with a vengeance, and then the next day it's sunny again. So we don't even know what to wear at this point in time.
Go with the flow, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
We could, I mean, living in the moment, going with the flow. We could go for hours discussing this, and you know, looking at what you and I have been through, the ascension process that you mentioned, and that will be excellent for another conversation, perhaps, at your convenience, of course.
Yeah.
So it's, you just have to, I mean, I've been told by close family members that Jodie lives in La La Land. I'm like, yes, I absolutely love my La La Land.
Yeah, I get the same. In fact, to be honest now, Jodie, the friends I have are the friends from inside Nikki's portal. Everyone else has gone. I have a few more local friends, one of whom runs a psychic development course, but they're friends who, without being disrespectful, they come from the background that I had as a child and are still there, and what I love about those people is they have nothing, but they give so much of themselves, for each other. They have that real community spirit that us middle class people don't have anymore because we're all wage slaves. And so I have those kind of friends, and then I have my friends in the portal, and I have a few friends who are also doing this journey but not in the portal, but they have been friends for a long time. And interestingly, they've all come from the Institute of Optimum Nutrition. So it's almost like those kind of people are already on the first run of the ladder. They're all going at the different paces, but the ascension work just accelerates it all.
It does. You end up meeting your tribe. Yeah, I lost all my friends, so-called friends, maybe one stuck around. But even then, it's very difficult. It's so interesting that nobody wants to have a play date with a child who has food allergies and food sensitivities. I mean, you're a grown person and you are afraid to have a little child play with your child in your home simply because you don't know what's going on. Like you're afraid. It's been, oh my goodness, it's just, not getting invites to birthday parties, but Brian was in a wheelchair, so we had to give up sports. There was lack of empathy of everyone with their own cliques, and so you have to rise above that versus trying to fit in, trying to be a people pleaser. It's the same with family members. I've got moms telling me that family members, look at her like she has two heads when she tells them, please do not give Coke, meaning as in the soft drink, right? The soda. Don't give soda to my son. And they look at her, it's just Coke. What do you mean just Coke? Do you know what's in there? And I have, right?
It cleans car engines, doesn't it?
It's, if you wish to poison your own body, by all means, they're like, I remember I had this nursery teacher ask me one day, this young chick, fresh out of school, she's like, Dr. Dashore, Brian had no idea what's a Happy Meal. You've never taken him to McDonald's? And I'm like, you are going to judge me on that? And I'm like, no, this is where you need to be still versus, so I'm like, nope. And I have no plans whatsoever of ever introducing McDonald's to my son. And then, that did not send the message home, right? A couple of weeks later, she's like, Brian doesn't know what Hershey's chocolate bar is. I'm like, no, he doesn't. He's 4. He's got vitiligo on his face, white spots. He's barely verbal, no functional language. You know what's going on with him, and you expect me not to withhold sugar? Whatever. So it was complete ignorance, and she was a special needs teacher. And they actually believe in all of this, McDonald's as a reward, sugary treats and candy as a reward. And then, right? And you have a child becoming ADHD right in front of your eyes, and that seems to be okay. It was, yeah. So it's very interesting how people try so hard to fall within those established boxes, which unfortunately and I'm glad I did. At that time it felt forced, but as you mature, as you grow, as you focus on family first, you learn that really isn't the important thing. And little by little I was able to find my tribe. My son found his tribe. So medicine is his calling. He really wants to help people. So yeah, amazing. So it's been fantastic having you here today. And any parting words to moms who are trying to heal their child, trying to heal themselves, their broken hearts, the pressures of society? What would you say to them?
I would say always trust your gut feeling, because you are the only person who knows your child. You just have to be strong enough to be able to say to the narrative, that's not my truth. And in the small amount of time that you've got to yourself, just go inside your own heart and nurture your own little girl, because there's a part of you and that little girl's crying out, and just by going into your own heart can generate more love to offset whatever's going on out there and whatever's coming your way. But I think it's always about trust your instinct, because your instinct will never be wrong.
Wonderful. I applaud you for saying that, and you actually gave me an inspiration for having maybe a round table of like-minded moms who can let's talk about us and looking at our inner child. Why do we have this need to please, this difficulty saying no, trying to earn the love of others before learning to love ourselves? Maybe if I can, it's just, I have so many moms that have fallen prey to that.
But I think a lot of us are empaths, and that's why we've got these children. And I think a lot more, I don't know if you're aware of Lawrence Heller's research, but Lawrence Heller talks about birth trauma and attachment trauma, and he puts it into categories of survival styles. And a lot of us who've had children on the autism spectrum who've had birth trauma, they fall into the connection style, which was my style, where they want a lot of social interaction, but they're actually afraid of it. So they'll make it to the door, and then that person will interact, and then they'll retreat. And you see this in the autism quite a lot. I saw it loads in my child, but I only learned that was my attachment style about 3 weeks ago. I just happened to be telling my group in the Ascension Portal what had happened to me over the previous 2 weeks, because I'm working with a lovely guy called David Router, who's an Australian guy. And he had done some really deep work with me, and I was just relaying that, and Nikki just came across and said, have you not listened to Heller? And I said, no. And she said, but you bought the Trauma Summit. And I said, yeah, but I was just overwhelmed with all the amount of information, and at the time I just didn't know which way to go. And she just said, source said Lawrence Heller. And so that's what I'm doing now with people, and I'm checking when I see my parents with kids with autism, I'm checking which survival style are they in.
Yes.
Because if you know that, And I use Ines Eagle's lovely book, The Secret Language of the Body, which tells us which emotions are behind, the pains that we feel. And Gabor Mate is brilliant at this as well. He talks about the pain body, doesn't he? So I give my autistic families, all that information from the 5 levels of healing, which I think when you've got all that information, you can make some more informed decisions, can't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So on that note, right, nothing further needs to be said. Anne has summed it up so beautifully. So for those of you who have joined me today, I'm positive you found today's interview very inspirational. So thank you for joining me. And I will see you back here next time on another episode of Autism Uprooted. Namaste.
Thank you for joining Master Herbalist Dr. Jodie A. Dashore, Director of the BioNexus Health Clinic and BioNexus Herbals, on the BioNexus Health podcast, where we explore and share information and stories about recovering and healing from chronic and environmental illnesses such as mold biotoxin illness, Lyme disease, autism spectrum disorder, fatigue, Crohn's and colitis, mast cell activation syndrome, PANS, and more. Please help us grow our message by subscribing to our podcast channel and sharing the podcast on your social networks. For more information, visit bionexushealth.com.
Information within this video, audio, or text, collectively known as the podcast, has not been reviewed by the FDA. Nothing within the podcast is intended as or should be construed as medical advice. Information is for general informational and educational purposes only. Consumers of the podcast should consult with their healthcare practitioners for medical recommendations. Seek the advice of a qualified healthcare provider. Do not disregard the advice of a healthcare provider based on any information from the podcast. The information within the podcast may contain information concerning dietary supplements or over-the-counter products that are not drugged. Our dietary supplement products are not intended for use as a means to cure, treat, prevent, diagnose, or mitigate any disease or other medical or abnormal condition.